and we are glad that you are here tonight in Doodah.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Quinn. I love this store. I tell everybody about it. It's
For a standard, you prefer to speak for you.
just maybe that, yeah. We'll start over.
His plane just got in, he just came in from the airport.
Well, no, and it wasn't scheduled to be this tight. But so in Denver, I went up to the gate. I was on time. I had to come from San Francisco, and so it said delayed. And so I said, why? You have to hesitate on that kind of question because they could snap at you. But I said, and so the plane that was taken out of service for unknown reasons, which I don't want to know, right? And anyway, I made it here on time. So thank you all for coming. Yes, well, okay. So you started on all my books my whole career so far is listed on this page. All my writing under Peter Abrahams and then under Spencer Quinn. So it's sort of arranged in order that makes sense, but I guess it doesn't. But under these, I wrote 17 standalones, which are all kind of dark. And I'm going to just bring this up because you mentioned Stephen King, and then we'll get to the regular or irregular presentation. So one of these, it was about the 7th or 8th book I wrote, was called The Fan, and it was about an obsessed fan of a baseball player and their relationship. Because I had this, one day it occurred to me that some of the fans care more about it than the players do. And that sets off a real disjunctive kind of thing that you can really make crime fiction out of. Anyway, and it was later made into a movie with Robert De Niro and a bunch of people. But I had nothing to do with that, I'm proud to say. And but here's how Stephen King comes in. So very shortly after the book The Fan came out, I got a call from a friend of mine who said, were you listening to the Red Sox game last night on the radio or seeing it on TV? I can't remember which. And I said, no. And he said, because there was a rain delay, and during the delay they had Stephen King, he's a Red Sox fan, they had Stephen King come into the box, to pass the time. And they asked him what was his favorite baseball novel. And he mentioned mine. He said it was The Fan, but I had missed all this. So I thought maybe my editor should know about this. And that's how, Stephen and I eventually became like friends. But it was due to that. So it wasn't the kind of thing where I was, trying to meet him and desperately sending emails and, or, gifts of flowers. None of that happened. So that's the story of that. Okay, now we'll begin with, so this is the 15th book in the series, but there could be people here who don't know the series. So can I just say how it came about and describe it briefly for those people? Okay, so, and if you've heard this before, yes, lady in the green, it's a big responsibility, I know. And power corrupts. I want to point that out too.
Keep her in mind.
Yes. So one night at dinner, my wife said, you should do something with dogs. Now, I've had dogs in some of these previous books I was just talking about, I think in even The Fan, perhaps. But the dogs were in little trot-on roles. You were never inside their heads, and they appeared for a chapter or two, and that was it. Nevertheless, I loved, and it was from the third person, right? I'd never written anything in the first person before Chet and Bernie. But some reviewers kept pointing out the dogs and how much they liked the dogs that appeared. But I knew my wife didn't mean that. Sometimes in this business, the writing novel business, an enormous amount of work can happen in a very brief amount of time. It's kind of like quantum physics, about which I know nothing, but there is that thing where two electrons can somehow be paired, even though they're at opposite ends of the universe. And Einstein never could accept that because he thought it invalidated the whole speed of light thing, which is the basis of E equals mc squared. Never mind any of that. The point is, all you need to remember is that sometimes in a work like this, a lot of work can get done in 30 seconds. The opposite is also true, the reverse, where you can sit there for months and nothing is happening. So, but I knew within about 30 seconds 3 things about what I wanted to do from what my wife had said. So think this is like a stool with 3 legs. So the first leg was, I wanted to write a book narrated from the point of view of and narrated by a dog. Second, the type of book. It was going to be a mystery that harkened back to the old formula invented by Arthur Conan Doyle, Sherlock Holmes, Dr. Watson, where the sidekick, and let's for a moment not try to define who the sidekick is in the Chet and Bernie series, but where the sidekick tells the story in the first person of this detective. Okay, that was leg number 2. The third leg, and if the series can be said to work, it's, I think, because of this narrating dog would not be a talking dog, would not be a human wrapped in a dog suit, would not know anything a dog shouldn't know. The dog narrator, Chet, as it turned out, would be as canine as I could make him. So my wife says this, and we live on Cape Cod, so we have a house over a marsh, and then there's a garage, detached, and over the garage is like the room over the garage, right? And the cars are down here, and then there's a room, and with sloping, ceilings and everything, and that's my office. So I have like this 15-foot commute, which I do, I show up for work every day, no matter how bad the traffic. I do that commute. So my wife but it's important psychologically, oddly enough. So she had just said, you just do something with dogs. I walked over, went up to the office. It was nighttime, and I never work at night. And I went just to see what it would look like on the page. And I typed up what became the first page of Doggone It, the first book in the series. And I walked back to the kitchen in the house, and I showed it to my wife, and she read it, and we voted 2-0 that it worked. Had the kids been home, we could have lost 4-2, and there'd be no Chet and Bernie series. Anyway, they weren't. So when you start out on a journey like this, writing a book, at least me, because I don't go in with a whole lot of planning, an A through Z, like a blueprint at all. I did at the beginning, but for my first book, I spent, I would say 6 weeks on an A through Z, just racking my brain on an A through Z outline. And so I started writing an A, B, C, and then around D, a character blurted something, a character in the book blurted something that I wasn't prepared for, that was way better than anything I had imagined. The problem was that if I went with that, what had just happened, I was going to have to discard, throw away everything, E through Z, the whole thing I've been working on. And that day, which was very early in my career, the beginning of it, so we're talking about, that book came out in 1980. That day I made a decision that I think was maybe my best, or it could have been my worst, but it was important to me. And that is, if an idea came out of the blue like that, meaning if there's such a thing as inspiration, then what would be the point of being in this career if you pushed it away, right? The whole point is to listen to that kind of thing. So I vowed to myself that if something like that happened, something out of the blue came, no matter how difficult it was going to make things, I would always go with that. So that's this journey I'm talking about. So you discover things on a journey, and sometimes they change things. Well, when I started on this journey, I discovered things that made it better for me. The first is that the plotting of a mystery novel, and these are mystery novels, it's a part of crime fiction, but the plotting of a mystery novel parallels the solving of a real crime. The way the cops would do it. You collect a bunch of clues, you put them in some sort of order, a chain of clues, and you make a logical deduction. Well, Chet doesn't do logical deductions. So my narrator can't do that. Not only that, suppose he could, but when an important clue was about to be revealed, maybe someone left half a bologna sandwich behind the piano. Or something like that. And so he's gone and he misses the clue. So what is he? Well, in MFA terms, Master of Fine Arts, which I don't have, but I dare to do this anyway, he becomes an unreliable narrator. Okay, a very cool MFA thing. That's what Chet is an unreliable narrator. And when you marry the unreliable narrator to this quite strict form of, the clues, all of a sudden you've blown up the whole thing. You've made a postmodern, that someone could write a PhD thesis on, and, well, I won't get into that, but,
So therefore.
yeah, thank you. And can you finish the talk? You're going to be way better than I will. Just off the plane, way better. So that's one of the discoveries I made here, and there are two more that were really important. We're human, and our visual sense is really strong. And if you read a lot of novels, there's so much visual going on, and the world of film is all visual with sound backup to tell you when to feel what. But it's visual. But Chet. This is being narrated by a being who, yes, he's got eyes and can see, but as anyone who knows and loves dogs knows, his sense of smell and his sense of hearing are way, way more powerful than ours. So a lot of the Chet and Bernie series is described through that other world. So for me, it makes it a challenge because you have to imagine exactly what, but it's so much fun to do that. And so what you've done is you've blown things up and you've made things interesting for you, the writer. That's at least, what happened with me. So one of the things, okay, I better get to the pen name. So I went to remember I'm over the garage, I write that page. I wrote that whole book, doggone it, without, my agent was waiting for a book, but I didn't tell her what it was going to be because it was this experiment. I sent it to her, she was very enthusiastic, but she had concern. She said, your other work is always in the third person, it's not narrated by a dog, and it's much darker. And although there's humor in your other work, I think she put it's icier. I took that as a compliment, actually, but what she was leading to is she was worried that the audience that she thought was out there for this book would be confused if it was under Peter Abrahams. In retrospect, I wish I hadn't done it because I have to explain this every damn time. But at the time I said, well, okay, meanwhile she'd been in contact with the publisher, we had an agreement. So it was only going to be 2 books, right? And then I'll go back to doing what I do. So this is the 15th. So once that happens, okay, and then I've had a couple ideas since then that weren't Chet and Bernie that became books. One was a book called The Right Side, which is much darker. It's about a female warrior coming back from Afghanistan. And then the other is my new series, the Mrs. Plansky books, which is actually lighter than The Right Side, but it's not dog narrated. So Mrs. Plansky's Revenge came out last summer, and Mrs. Plansky Goes Rogue comes out next summer. But so I said, can those be Peter Abrahams books? Oh, and so my editor said, that sounds great, well, let's look into it. And then she called a couple days later, well, marketing doesn't like that idea. So marketing is the club that they hit you over the head with. Because if you go against marketing and things don't turn out as well as they hoped, they can say, wow, what can we do? Marketing told you. So that's why all my writing right now is under Spencer Quinn. So the series can be read in any order. People often say, what order should be read in? That's not a question Chet would ever ask, right? But sometimes he refers to cases in the past, And there are two kinds. One are the cases in the past that I have not turned into a novel. In other words, all that we know about them is that little bit that he said. And the other are actual books, you know, like I think this is sometimes, There by Hangs a Tale, early in the series, and sometimes later he might refer to that case. But what I'll do is I'll just fold in the little bits of exposition you need to know later. You know, so it's not, so you don't even know, you know, that you're being told a little bit of exposition. I'll do a little digression before we get to this book. My mother taught me most of what I know about writing when I was really pretty young. And one of the things she said is, don't explain anything. Tell the story, but all the little sort of details that the reader needs to know, you've got to fold them in unseen so that you don't slow down the momentum. Quote, fold them in like truffles in a cream sauce. And she wasn't even a good cook. Right? I mean, and we never got truffles in a cream sauce at home. Or any breakfast was toasted this and that from the freezer. But she was a natural-born artist and really taught me everything. Okay, we'll make another digression, then we'll get to Chet and Bernie. She was a stickler. She said things like, if you don't use 3 words if one will do. Don't use connecting words. However, nevertheless, to be sure. Sentences should connect through the force of the ideas connecting. And if you find yourself using a lot of connecting words, go back and rethink. And the exact right word, you know, was very important. But the most important thing she did was, and this is probably the thing that they always say you can't be taught, but I'm not so sure because of what happened to me. She worked on my imagination, I think, to this extent. She said, don't push everything as far as you can, and don't ever do it like somebody else. So, good and bad, right? Okay, here, and now we'll make one more digression, and I'll embarrass myself by talking about myself as about a 4-year-old, just in the way of don't do anything like everyone else. I went to like pre-kindergarten, and one day my mom came to pick me up, and the teacher told her this story. Okay, it was a rainy day. Normally, we went for a walk. I don't remember any of this, right? I have no memories earlier than the age of about 61. So, normally we went for a walk, but this day it was raining. So the walk was inside, but it was sort of imaginary. In other words, we're not just walking around. The teacher would say, okay, red light, and we would all clomp to a stop, you know, or car coming, and we, you know, hang back in the classroom. So do you see what I'm saying? Imaginary walking in the classroom. So we're walking, and the teacher said, oh, here's a puddle, and all the kids walked around the puddle, except for me. I walked through the puddle. And the teacher said, Petey, I was called Petey, what about the puddle? And I said, I've got boots on. Okay, so this, I've got boots on, what would you call it, DNA, never died in me, and still crops up at the worst possible times. Anyway, so this book is, here's how I got the idea of this book. Okay, there's the idea that sort of gets you going on the book, and what the book is about is not the same as the engine that drives the story, or what you might call the spirit of the book, or the beating heart of it. That's a different thing entirely. I'll give you a little illustration. I was at the Tucson Book Festival a few years, I've been a few times, but it's a great festival if you're ever interested in that kind of thing. So I was up on a stage with 2 other writers, you know, on stools, late in the day, when you probably don't want writers on stools, because writers sort of on vacation, blabbing in front of an audience, might have had a few drinks, and now they're up on stools. You never know what can happen. Anyway, somebody in the audience said, what about writer's block? And the other 2 writers bemoaned writer's block, but I knocked on wood and I said I've never had it. And well, how is that possible? And I said, whenever I feel that I don't know exactly where I'm going, I step back and I think of the spirit of the book, the engine driving the book, and then some narrative route or route always suggests itself. The beating heart, the engine that makes the Chet and Bernie stories go, is the love between Chet and Bernie. So if I think I'm going to be stuck, I step back, and whatever happens next has to in some way be related to the love between. It could be a new aspect of it, it could be shining a light on something else, it could even be subtly trying to undermine it, to which they resist. But it has to be something with that, and with that guidance, I just don't get stuck. And just as a footnote to that, about 2 weeks after that festival, I got an email from one of those two writers. All it said was, "It works." So that was nice.